Thank you, Catie. So polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I am not the most fluent in PAHs. We have some folks on the call that are more fluent than I am. I believe I saw Lynette and Ugo and maybe Roger and Amy on from the Water Investment Division. There may be others on from Waste Management and Waste Prevention. So I'm just going to lead with that. We're going to talk about what they are, where they are, and how their presence does or doesn't change public water construction permitting. This question was raised by a consultant as they prepared, that they were in the preliminary engineering phase of a project and discovered some PAHs and had some questions. So that's where this question is coming from, and we're doing our best to answer it here. Go ahead, Catie. Are we stuck? There we go. So what are PAHs? PAHs are formed as the result of incomplete combustion of carbon-containing materials such as wood, coal, oil, gas, or biomass. They can also be man-made. Naphthalene is one that some of us may be familiar with. We associate it with mothballs and the smell of railroad tracks. I've put a more thorough definition or explanation here, and the slides in general will be more thorough and wordy so that you can reference them in the future. We're going to post these on our website, so you don't have to scribble notes. And then go ahead, Catie. So where are they? So we know that they're, ubiquitous, right? So what does that mean? Well, there are identified releases of hazardous materials, and that's its own thing, and you should reach out to Waste Management about those sites. There's also urban soils, or sometimes called development soils. And so you can see some on the screen right now. There's a map of Vermont pulled up from the atlas, from the ANR atlas, and the urban soils layer on the atlas will show you where these soils have been mapped. So on the screen you can see these areas circled in red are some of the largest areas with or identified areas of urban soils. Basically Burlington, right around Montpelier, Rutland, and Bennington. But you should visit the atlas to look at your project sites to see if there are any of these soils identified in the towns that you are working in. And there are some links provided on this slide that you can also visit for more of Waste Management's information. So in urban soils, and they have specific concentrations that they are identifying here. So these would be considered background urban soils. Go ahead, Catie. So what does it mean for your construction permit? Right now, there are no proposed changes to our standard language. So that means if you see urban soils in your project area, that doesn't mean that we are going to make you change your pipe material for our permitting process. However, if you still need to follow AWWA standards, and the AWWA standards call out that if you need to pass through an area of gross contamination, you need to consult with the manufacturer to understand what will happen. What's the permeation? Will there be permeation through the pipe walls, joints, or fittings? Are there any other concerns about this material being in that contaminant? And the reason we're bringing that up is because there are certain pHs, not every pH is the same. PVC can be a great material choice for certain pHs, but for other ones, it's not resistant at all. And we're basing this information, or we're basing these opinions basically on 2 references. They're the ones that you can see to the right, chapter 3, the PVC handbook, and then permeation and leaching by EPA. And some of the things that we're working through with waste management and others internally is how is gross contamination defined? So concentration, how would you notice this in the field? Is it visible? Would it be smell? What are some of the other indicators for you? Because if it's not something that you can easily identify, you know, that adds challenges to this that we need to work through. Go ahead, Catie. So there are obviously others in the Department of Environmental Conservation that need to be contacted about pHs or urban soils, and you need to, such as Waste Management and Prevention Division, you need to come up with a soil management plan and take steps to comply with their requirements, and to think about how it will affect your site during construction. From our standpoint right now, this really needs to be thought about during the preliminary engineering design phase, because of its impact to your timelines and budget. That's where we see it as probably the most impactful right now. We did have someone scheduled to come on and talk about their experience, but I'm wondering, and I want to put it out to the group now, if any of you have experiences with pHs on your job sites and what you did and how they affected your project. Craig, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, so we ran into this in the Center Rutland, West Rutland project, and we actually had HDPE, not PVC, so highly transmissive. You know, we had to replace that particular section with ductile, and we had to replace the gaskets. They needed specific gaskets within that section to make sure that we could keep that out of there. So that was the change related to that. Whether or not we would have known it ahead of time, there was some smacked sites or some closed sites that probably should have given us a little bit more indication. We did have an alternative in there for switching over to that, and a management plan if we came across a contamination. And most of the times, at least in Rutland County, that management or identification of that is always a placeholder in our documents. Just if we come across it, here's the process that you've got to go through, here's who you've got to contact, that sort of stuff, at least in the areas where we know there's at least a reasonable chance of running into it.
Has that been a common experience for you? Is that why it's in your kind of boilerplate back?
We've run into it, health and safety plans, a couple of different times. We like to put it in there so the contractor's forced to put a price associated with it in a bidding environment, rather than once they're already under contract and now they're basically just setting the price and it's a negotiation. We tend to find we get some better pricing if it's done in the bidding environment, even if we never end up using it. Still better to establish it under those parameters than waiting until you have a contractor under contract and now you're just beholden to whatever price he kind of comes up with because he didn't bid any of that stuff.
Okay. There's someone else with a hand up. I'm trying to figure out who it is. Sorry.
Hi, it's Chrissy Haskins.
Hi, Chrissy.
So we came across this in one of our Bellas Falls projects. We were going through a known brownfield. And so we knew there had been a lot of previous assessment and testing done. We knew PAH was there along with arsenic and dioxin. So during the design process, we reached out to the PVC Pipe Association, the Plastic Pipe Association, and DIPRA to ask them how their pipes could handle these different contaminants. We shared the report with them, and that resulted in us going with ductile because PVC and HDPE, they could not confirm if their pipe was suitable for use with all of the contaminants we had. With DIPRA, they had suggested to us that we use the fluorocarbon gaskets and that we poly-wrap the pipe just to be safe. So we did all of that during our project.
Thanks, Christy. That was one of the most illuminating thing doing this research was seeing just how different the various pHs, how different pipes reacted to them. The PVC was great for some, and then others it just isn't. It fails. Now, I mean, some of the studies that we looked at were really conservative. We're talking about very high concentrations of some of these contaminants. So maybe not, that's why we were less concerned about the urban soils level. But when you're going through known areas of more concentrated contamination, it seems like you have to be really, really cognizant of what's there and how it reacts with your material choices. Anyone else? Okay.
I had some experience with the background levels of urban soils when I worked with Dufresne Group there, and Hugo I think it was Hugo, he brought it up with me, and I don't know exactly how we worked it out or if it rose to the level of if how it was addressed in the environmental report, or if there was anything that ended up needing to happen with that. But the impression I got was that the background levels of urban soils are mapped in, wherever there are houses, really. And I'm like, I guess this was one of the things I was hoping we might hear more about. Is this becoming something that needs to be sampled for every project that's in an area where these could exist, or how do we distinguish where it's a concern and where it's not?
Maybe Hugo can jump in here, but I mean, what I was seeing in the research that I did was that we weren't concerned about the urban soils levels. That it's more if you're coming in contact with product. So I think that's the distinction that I started to kind of try to chase down is what is our definition of gross contamination? Because that's where it looks like more of these pipe materials start to fail. But maybe Hugo could jump in, or Lynette.
Well, I think this is Hugo. I'm not going to be able to give you a satisfying answer. Definitely, I think waste management is the place to go to get guidance on all of the management of soils and delineation and identification of what's going on. I think your question is more about at what concentration do these products begin to fail? And I think that concentration is different for each of the compounds. So it's hard for the state, beyond any of us, to come up with a threshold for the whole family of PAHs. So that's the conundrum. I think, you know, we can say gross contamination, but we don't really know what the number is for transitioning from urban background levels to levels that are now such that they are going to jeopardize the product that you're trying to install. So I think the criteria, if I was on the private sector, would be to look at the materials you typically use and get acquainted with what makes them fail, so you're aware of whether or not you need to look deeper into whether that material choice is right.
Then on the funding side, the other concern is just making sure that any wasted materials are wasted in an area where you're not creating a new contaminated area that might be unmapped. So Trish, jump in if I'm overstepping, but we're basically looking that if you're not doing any testing, if you're not smelling anything, that those soils are wasted in a place that also has the background contamination.
That's correct. This is tricked with the waste management division program. I think all of us on the call have different priorities. Of course, ours is sure that if you're going through contamination, that you're not going to have it structure your planner. But on top of that, you know, we want to ensure that any contamination might be excavated into and known.
Trish, we can hear most of
inevitably creating a new hazardous waste site and liability for yourself. So our organization and understand what it is digging into and through, and as Linda said, if you're wasting, so you know where you can bring them for disposal.
Trish,
I'm not sure I heard your question.
Oh, you were breaking up a lot, for at least for me. I assume for everybody else too. I think we might have picked up some of what you said, but a lot of it was choppy. So I think but if there's anything that you need us to gather from that, maybe drop it in the chat if you can. Allison, I'm wondering, do we know do we have a website address of where you'll put those slides? I think those resources that you showed onto those two slides would be good for everybody to be able to know which ones those are. And the website links also, it might be a good, you know, at least one resource to have.
Yes, I'll drop it in the chat where I believe that these will be posted.
Patrick, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was wondering if you're within the, say, urban soil area, are there any red flags that would draw your attention to saying, oh, we should really look into this, such as, was there a fire on site? Were there railroad tracks? Christina said Shiz was a brownfield site. I'm wondering if Craig had something that came up that made someone realize there might be a contaminant there.
I guess I'd like to say that we probably should have anticipated it through the preliminary engineering. It wasn't necessarily. That was the smell test. Contractor going through it, and you could smell it. You didn't even have to get towards the trench, and you could smell it. So
Okay.
it was really that situation, and then stopping and figuring out what we had for levels and where it was. You know, where we had it, where we didn't have it.
Okay.
I would say in general, if you have any sort of closed, previously contaminated sites that have, you know, been cleared and everything's good, I would still offer caution to have at least something in your contract that is kind of a rainy day event sort of thing to say, okay, if we don't think we have this, but let's plan for it, so that the contractor kind of has to establish a price and we have a protocol and a procedure for how that goes. It's really difficult in the middle of a construction project, because the first thing the contractor is going to tell you is you're slowing them down. So that helps eliminate at least that portion of that conversation, and there's a procedure that they were aware of while they were bidding through that, if we really think it's at all a possibility.
This is Trish, and I hope you can hear me better now. I would just point out that we do have a linear guidance document that's up on our website that walks anyone through a linear guidance project: wastewater, drinking water, stormwater, roads, bike paths, the process that we would hope you would follow to identify where there could be contamination and how to address it before you actually start the install of your project, so that the sites program doesn't slow you down when you do find contamination on your project.
Amy, you have your hand.
I'm dropping Trisha's link in the chat. Oh, she's driving.
Yeah, I just had a really basic question. The first time I learned about PHs, I think, was when I heard a webinar by, I think it was University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, where they do research on stormwater practices. And it was about how when people seal coat a driveway or a parking lot, like the first flush of rain after that puts a huge amount of PHs into streams and that sort of thing. So it just seems like with so many people seal coating their driveways, like in an urban area, there's going to be, you know, little bits of this everywhere. Is that just all part of that background? And then I'm also wondering, just for a construction site, is there anything unique about that? Or if you're trying to do the smell test and you've got, you know, a project that's a mix of V-Trans and sewer and water and everything all going on at once, like, just seems like there's so many sources of these. I don't know how you cope with this in a practical way.
If you're asking me, the way that we would like people to cope with it is not with your nose, but with a lab, and do pre-characterization beforehand if you think that there's a potential for contamination to be present.
Roger also has his hand up.
Yeah, you may not want to forget, because you could do the best plan and do your research, look at maps of known petroleum cleanup sites or brownfields or anything like that. But in discovery, you're going to find when you get to construction, you will find it not mapped anywhere. So the best plan, what Craig pointed out, is to have a plan of attack in case of, and normally our construction documents with our SRF, we do ask that, put that in the supplementary part of it, to have a plan in effect to either call the Petroleum Cleanup Fund, exercise, do the sniff test and see if it's a contaminant and evaluate it, and then figure out the protocol, how it's going to be expended and how it's going to work, and to have a certified contractor that can do the work. So those are all pre-planned with the engineer of record to plan accordingly. So there is, like town of Middlebury, they have corrosive soils. So they put polywrap around their pipe, a normal protocol. Local job knowledge of public works people have a lot of information that they could share with that consultant as they develop the project. So they may know of a spill or a fire or something happened locally, and they share that with you. That brings your suspicion up to evaluate and consider that as part of your preliminary and final design of a project. So local job knowledge is pretty important when you engage with them and inquire about it. So just don't rely on the maps and everything else. Talk to that local public works guy, and they could probably vent in that situation historically. So.
Thanks, Roger.
Yep.
It's at 1:30, so I wanted to move on to our other topics to make sure we had them. But I'll just say, is there anybody else who has a question or anything to share on this topic before we move on?
To sort of help with some of these issues, we are expanding the EID form to include this topic and to sort of flesh out where you can go in that atlas to get better information. That's all.
Thank you. Patrick, you still have your hand up. Is that just a remnant?
That's a remnant. I'll lower it.
Thanks. All right, so next topic is pipe bursting, asbestos cement pipe. And we had two resources that we just wanted to make sure everybody had access to. And they were attached to the meeting invite here. And we talked about these a little bit at the Vermont Rural Water Association and maybe in some emails. So this may be new, not news to many of you, but I'm just going to open them up and see if I can at least introduce them to people who haven't seen them before. So EPA has written a memo that includes information about asbestos cement pipe and specifically pipe bursting techniques. And also we have a Q&A that gets a little bit more specific about it. I'm trying to share my screen, but it didn't quite work. So hold on a second. So this is, that's everybody. This is a memo from April 13th about asbestos cement pipe replacement. It talks about NESHAP requirements. This is where the regulation of dealing with asbestos is located. And pipe replacement is considered a renovation activity under that. The memo here talks about approved methods for pipe replacement. So if you're ever dealing with asbestos cement, this is a good resource to have available to you. And then the bigger news that we want to make sure everybody's aware of is that pipe bursting of asbestos cement is not an approved technology. We did have one drinking water project that had proposed this, and we've had a couple projects in the past that have used this technique. And so this memo is a change to what's been done in the past in Vermont, which is part of the reason why I want to make sure everybody's aware of it. And the other resource, and I got this from Amy, and so I don't know much about it. Amy, maybe you can tell us what exactly this is, but I just wanted to.
There's just item 6.7. So this is some frequently asked questions about, it's specifically about SRF eligibility and mostly related to the bill. So I'm not sure, this must have been a question someone submitted to EPA, but it, you know, both in terms of a good practice and in terms of SRF eligibility, it's just that one. I think it's only that one question, 6.7 has some, I think it overlaps with what you just said.
Yeah, and I think this question and answer just makes it a lot clearer that EPA isn't going to be funding any work that includes asbestos cement pipe bursting, and that's just another resource to have on that topic. Craig, you may know.
Yeah, just a clarification. I'm assuming abandonment in place is allowed even though it's not in the replacement method. I'm assuming it just didn't need to be mentioned, that you could leave it in place and replace the water main somewhere else. Just wanted to make sure that I had that correct, or that we do have to physically remove it if there's any sort of open trench installation on a project.
I believe that same blurb 6.7, that answer says AC pipe may be abandoned in place with the new pipeline laid in a separate area without acting upon the existing AC.
Perfect. Should have read that one too.
All right, that seems like a simple one. Assuming, oh wait, we have another hand up. Excellent. Hugo.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we talk about pipe replacement, and in our sewer world, we do that as well. And I always try to remind myself to remember that, to replace it or to disconnect it if someone's down in a pit or trench. We need to ensure that proper OSHA rule compliant measures are taken for the workers that are doing that.
So we'll go, you're talking about like every time you have some AC pipe exposed in a trench and you're working on it to make sure that you are following the work practices.
Right. Like if you're going to disconnect it from a manhole or some other, disconnection where you're going to be actually exposing it, you're now having to be careful about, not concluding that because you are leaving it in place that you don't need to comply with OSHA for your workers down the hole that might be doing some of the sawing or disconnecting.
Good point. Thank you. Roger?
I just wanted to mention something really quick. Asbestos tailings is an avenue up there in the Northeastern Kingdom. They build the roads, and a lot of times you'll see the asbestos tailings. We did have a project at Troy J, the road that goes up to J Peak, where they had tailings in there. And in that discovery, we did have to develop a protocol in the contract to help alert the contractor when he bids on this, that part of his health and safety plan, he needs to alert his employees that there's possible asbestos tailings in that. And there was some tests done by the consultant, also just to back up as they dug up material, not necessarily pipe, but material that was laid in the roadbed. So the health and safety plan, generally we rely on the Vermont Department of Health. They have an asbestos coordinator. I forget the guy's name, but I hope he's still there. But he was very helpful in producing a nice protocol as part of a health and safety plan to alert the contractor. This is a suggested recommendation to pursue further. So ultimately, the contractor is responsible for methods and means in dealing with that kind of environment. So alerting them helps the contractor to gather around to protect his employees as they do business. So just want to mention that.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to share anything on this topic, experiences or questions?
On the Troy J project, we were initially alerted to the contamination by V-Trans. So if there's a paving project with borings, it's worth checking in with them, especially if you're anywhere up by the asbestos line.
That is correct, Lynette. You're right on the ball on that one.
So the paving project had borings or probes that identified the ledge tailings as like a fill material in the
Correct.
roads. Okay.
Yeah, V-Trans has historical knowledge in dealing with that road base in certain areas of the state, and they're receptive, and they will alert through part of their permitting to tell other agencies on that, or at least tell the consultant this they need to be aware of. So they have a lot of information in that arena. But the safety and protocol for SRF, we rely on the Vermont Department of Health to give us the protocol. It may not mirror what V-Trans does on their projects.
Anyone else? Our next topic is disinfection chemicals, but we'll take any shares or questions on this one. Not seeing any, we'll move on. Catie, do you want to introduce our next topic?
Sure. Before I was going to get started and show everyone, we have, so if you haven't been made aware of yet, we have a new ANR online application for our individual and general water main construction permits. And we have this new guidance document here, and that will link you to this. And it kind of just like gets you through step by step of how to complete the application. We also have these YouTube videos that Nathan, our newest engineer, recorded. So those would be helpful, and they go by the section within the form, so you can skip through, look at the ones that you have questions on. And we also have an FAQs page coming. I believe we just have these FAQs right now. But everything should be posted in this area, and we'll probably send out some sort of announcement to make sure that everybody has access to the guidance. But just we wanted to make sure everyone is aware that we have these new guidance documents and tutorial videos to complete the new forms. Yeah, and then I will share my screen again. See if I can do this a little bit better. Okay. So we were just going to talk a little bit about disinfection chemicals and the certification for NSF ANSI 60. And basically just as it relates to disinfecting water mains, new water mains, there's a part of the rule 8.5.7 that calls out AWWA standard C651. And in this section of the rule and the standard itself, NSF 60 is called out. So any chemicals, disinfection chemicals that are used to disinfect new water mains, new storage tanks, anything related to drinking water, like those major components, needs to meet this certification. And there are a couple of different options and methods for disinfecting water mains, and a couple that are listed in the C651. The one that we heavily discourage against and is prohibited by the water supply rule is the calcium hypochlorite tablet method. So sodium hypochlorite, so basically bleach without scents or optical brightening agents, that's the most common and preferred method. And I also have a few links to the NSF listings. I have heard that there are some supply chain issues, as there is with everything, not just in drinking water, with NSF 60 chemicals. So that's just something to note. And there's a couple of different nuances to the NSF 60 certification. So sodium hypochlorite is pretty sensitive to repackaging, and in its decomposition, chlorate and perchlorate can be expected in higher repackaged samples. So for that reason, and probably additional reasons that I'm not aware of, once the disinfection chemical that was certified, ANSI NSF 60, comes out of its container to disinfect the water mains, it actually is no longer certified. And that's not something that we really have an answer to in the division, but it's just more important to make sure that it is NSF 60 certified and what you're looking for. So a lot of words, a lot of pictures on a slide. But what you're looking for here is this mark. So making sure you have company name, product name, and where it was manufactured, and looking for this mark and the product's maximum use level. Making sure they arrive in properly sealed containers that are sourced directly from the company and not third-party certifiers. And this kind of just goes more into detail about what happens when you receive a delivered product and making sure it meets those certifications, and the fact that the certification is voided when it's repackaged or diluted, transferred, or anything that you would need to do to disinfect water mains. So interesting finding that we found there. So wondering if people have any experience with how to navigate that.
I think what we're most concerned with is that the chemical that's purchased is purchased with the NSF 60 certification, and it makes sense that the contractor or the water system will need to move it around and may change containers to do that, or you'll obviously need to pour it out of your container to use it. But more that the chemical that you're starting with is an NSF 60 certified chemical. And that's something that we bring up at water systems all the time. But it's not something that we have a history of talking about in the construction field. And so how that plays out in construction is something that we're asking, wondering, but also want to see happen and make sure that that's something that's being paid attention to. So if anybody has any experience, with contractors or doing the disinfection and this question coming up, then please share. Chrissy?
So we're doing a water main project right now, and after you mentioning it at one of the conference seminars, when we did our disinfection on the first segment of pipe, I actually grabbed the bottle out of the contractor's truck and checked it, and it did have the NSF symbol on it, so that was a good sign. So I did notify my RPRs that we should be looking for that in the future and making sure they have that NSF certification.
That's great. Thank you, Chrissy. That's good to know that you found it working out there and that you're paying attention to it. Yeah, I think part of what we're feeling at the division is kind of the consulting engineers are the ones who have all the contact with the contractors, and so it's from you that we hear about how things actually go on the projects that we're issuing construction permits for. So it's great to hear that information. And those are good resources that Catie put up. We can post those slides too, and if that generates any additional discussion or points, then this is kind of a recurring topic for us. When I started the division in 2016, I think the first question I was asked was, can you get NSF 60 certified chemical in a gallon container? Do you have to get it from a chemical supplier? And the best I could find out was that you had to get it from a chemical supplier. This was like shortly after Clorox had stopped selling certified chemical. All right, I think we got through most of our topics. We have about 9 minutes left. I had a couple ideas about what we would talk about at our next sharing session, which is September probably. And we haven't set a date, but we're trying to do these quarterly, I believe. And we were thinking that September would be towards the end of the construction season, so you all might have some excellent stories to share, or experiences gained, and that that two of the ideas that have been on my mind, because I'm living in a construction site, are temporary water and managing cross connections. Preventing cross connections, but there are myriad of topics that come up during construction. So if anybody has any thoughts of what might be interesting, or any experiences that they've had over the season, we'd love to hear them. Or if there's some other pertinent topic that you've talked about with us, or talked about in your own firms, or researched, and you want to share. Part of these sessions is just for us to get together, and not necessarily for us to talk at you, but for us all to know each other and recognize that we're all in the same field together. Any ideas? Well, we'll come up with some. I'm sure there'll be some pretty exciting things happening. I don't know what I wanted to do for a conclusion.
Dave, I think Dave has his hand up. Davidson.
Oh, Dave.
Yeah, I think one thing to share and maybe talk about experiences is the unusual, bidding climate that we find ourselves in, and maybe share some experiences with that, and how projects can be bid to be a little more favorable, whether it's giving a contractor more time to do the work. But it's, I've only been doing this for about 46 years, and this is really, the last year, 2 years is one of the most unusual periods I've seen in this business. The late 90s was kind of a crazy period, because the economy was so strong and everybody had money to spend and things were kind of crazy. But what's been going on since the pandemic, with all the money coming, just flowing down from the federal government, and how it's affected our discipline. And again, I think in terms of bidding experiences, be interesting maybe to share some stories on that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, we've definitely been hearing about project delays, projects needing to be rebid. So if we keep that as our central theme, then we could start to share that at the end, in the next quarter. We're not at the end of this heavy workload or this money. We're at the beginning of all this money. So I think that would be a great thing to talk about. Yeah. I saw Craig shaking his head yes too.
Give the contractor an open-ended schedule to bid against. That's the only thing that's going to help your pricing at this point. They're only getting some of the material suppliers are giving them 24 hours notice or less on their pricing. So I mean, with that sort of environment, you just need to be as flexible as you can be, or as much as the owners are willing to be. And I can tell you right now, the last 3 projects we've bid in the last 3 weeks, we haven't had one contractor who was interested if it started with 2022 as far as their construction is concerned, unless it was start it, buy the material, shut it down, and we'll get back to you in 2023. And that's really, I'd be shocked if there were a lot of differences throughout the state related to that, with majority of the contractors that we're barely into the construction season and we're already looking at next year with a lot of things that we were hoping to get done this year.
They don't have materials, they don't have labor.
Yep.
And you know, the level of risk and uncertainty with bidding is I've never seen it like this.
Would it be valuable to open up our sharing session to some contractors
Absolutely.
for that topic, or for any topic really?
Bring your handkerchief.
Because we'll be crying, or
You'll need it for them.
Okay.
And us.
All right, well, that was a good suggestion. We'll wrap it up. Thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate. I'm really excited about this continuing and happy that you're all showing up. I hope you're finding it valuable too.
Good session.
Thank you.